and they'll watch all of these mob movies, and they'll say, come on, Michael, you had all the women, you had the cars, you had the money, you had respect, you had power. I said, yes, but did you watch the end of the movie?
If your mother's sick in hospital and you're there and we call you, you're expected to come. That's the type of commitment once you become a made man.
Absolutely. That's the oath that you take. But I don't know any family of any member of that life that hasn't been totally devastated,
Right.
including my own.
Well, thanks for agreeing to come on I Catch Killers, Michael. It's I'm really looking forward to this chat.
Well, it's good to be here. I know we're quite a few miles away, but this is the magic of technology today, right?
For people in Australia, the Mafia, we've probably developed our thoughts on the Mafia by shows like Goodfella, the Godfather trilogy, which, you know, a classic. Everyone liked it, and the Untouchables. Tell us about the Mafia, the real Mafia, what the Mafia is, the structure, the origins of it, that type of thing, for people in Australia so they can understand. I think America has a more clearer understanding of the Mafia, but for the people over here in Australia, what is the Mafia? Where did it originate from?
Well, you know, Cosa Nostra, as it's called in the United States, really was born out of the Sicilian Mafia in Italy, and that's Cosa Nostra. Now, there are different groups. There's Nangrata, you know, there's a different, the Calabrians are in, from what I understand, are mostly in Australia. That's the biggest group there.
That's correct.
And as a matter of fact, I'm going to be honest with you, because I'm going on tour there, I've already heard from one or two people, you know, that are expecting me to come over.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, one person was good, the other one wasn't good, you know, so we'll see what happens. But, you know, listen, I always say this: Cosa Nostra Mafia in America survived and prospered and thrived under some very difficult conditions for over 100 years. And, you know, when the immigrants first came over here, you know, back at the, you know, early 1900s, and they came here basically to escape what was going on in Sicily, because Mussolini was against the Mafia there, and a lot of them came over here and they established themselves. But you know, initially they were just a bunch of gangsters, you know, really preying on their own neighborhood people, you know, extorting people and so on and so forth. But what happened was, and I say this, what the United States did for the Mafia, nobody else has ever done. What do I mean by that? When they made prohibition, that's what created really Cosa Nostra to be a force in America, because they knew how, we knew how, I say, to capitalize on it. And over that 13-year period, we became extremely wealthy, extremely organized, and that's when we really became rooted in society in America. And then it just grew from there. It's very organized, you know, from the top to the bottom, very disciplined, very structured. And as a result of that, we were able to survive and prosper.
Yeah, tell us about the structure of the Mafia. And, you know, I understand the Mafia boss, the different families, the underboss, the Capo. Tell us about the structure of how the Mafia is set up. And again, you're not telling stories out of school here, like people are aware of it, but just so people in Australia understand the structure of the Mafia.
Sure. You start out, you have a boss.
Yep.
You have an underboss, which is his basically second in command. You have a consigliere, which is a high position, and he's appointed by the boss. Now, most people have seen The Godfather, and Robert Duvall played that role brilliantly, but it was fictional in The Godfather, because in order to be a sworn made member of the life and take the oath, your father at least has to be Italian. And Robert Duvall in that movie wasn't Italian. So these are all of Italian descent. And then the next ranking is a capo regime, or captain, and then you have a soldier. Now, those rankings that I just talked about, they all took the oath. They all became made members of the life. Then, of course, you have a lot of associates that are not made members. They don't have the same weight. They don't carry the same authority, but they're associates to the soldiers, the capo regimes, the boss. And, you know, you're in business with them. You have relationships with them. They're part of the life, but they're not officially part of the life. So that's basically the structure.
Okay, so those associates don't have to abide by the code. And when you talk at the soldier level and capo level, is that made man? Is that when we hear the terminology, you become a made man? Is that the level they come into as a soldier?
Yes, when you take the oath, you become, the first level is a soldier.
Right.
And you're a made man at that point in time. Now, associates, they're not held to the same strict standard. However, they still have to abide by the rules. For instance, if we're not allowed to deal with drugs, well, our associates are not allowed to deal with drugs either.
Right.
You know what I mean? And if they do, they may not get killed because of it, but they're going to be, told very sternly that if you do this again, you got a problem, or you're no longer an associate of ours. So they have to abide by the rules, but the consequences for breaking them may not be as severe.
Severe. I think it might have been from your book, Blood Covenant, that you talked about advice you were given if you're going to become a made man. I think you used the example, and this is just sort of me reconstructing it, that if you take this oath, the mafia family is more important than your own family. And an example was used: if your mother's sick in hospital and you're there and we call you, you're expected to come. That's the type of commitment once you become a made man, that you are, your mafia family comes first.
Absolutely. That's the oath that you take. And you're told straight out, if your mother is sick and dying and we call you to service, you leave your mother, you come and serve us. We're number one before anything and everything in your life. And, it's that code that is really what made the mafia survive and thrive, because it was strictly adhered to.
Yeah.
And the consequences for violating it could be very severe. And people knew that. So you abide by the rules.
And when you say severe, it could be you're never seen again type severe.
That's correct.
As in not just end up in hospital. The oath, the actual taking of the oath. I've heard people talk about it, the actual process of it. It's about burning something in the palm of your hand. It's a very formalised oath. Are you comfortable talking about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a very solemn ceremony. You don't know when it's going to happen. For security reasons, nobody is told like, hey, tomorrow night you're going to take an oath. No, you're just you have a normal day. You're called upon. And when the superiors set it up, that's when it happens. And for me, it was Halloween night here in the States in 1975. It was myself and 5 other gentlemen all took the oath that night. Very solemn ceremony. It was a dimly lit room late at night. They wanted you to understand the seriousness of what you were getting involved in.
Yeah.
We walked into the room individually. The boss was seated at the head of like a horseshoe configuration. The underboss, consigliere, to his left and right. All the Capo regimes were alongside of them. We had about 15 in our family at that point. I walked down the aisle, stood in front of the boss, held out my hand. He took a knife, cut my finger. Some blood dropped on the floor. This is a blood oath.
Yep.
I cupped my hands. He took a picture of a saint. It was a Catholic altar card. Put it in my hands, lit it aflame. It didn't hurt. It burned quickly. It was merely symbolic.
Yeah.
And he said, tonight, Michael Franzese, you are born again into a new life, into Cosa Nostra. Violate what you know about this life, betray the oath, betray your brothers, and you will die and burn in hell like the saint is burning in your hands. Do you accept? Yes, I do. That's it. Short and sweet, but that's the oath.
Sure.
And by the time you take that oath, you've been through a whole recruiting period, and you know exactly what's coming. So you've had to prove yourself, to get into that room on that night.
And is it correct to, before you're accepted and made, that they'll ask around if there's anyone that disagrees, anyone that's in the family disagrees? Well, that might no, we don't want him. I don't trust Michael for whatever reason, or I've had a falling out with him. He's not the type we want in there. Is that the type of process you go through before you're accepted?
Yeah, and it's even more extensive than that. They put your name on a list, and it goes to all the families in New York. Right. And they look at it, and if there's any reason that they know of that you shouldn't be made, they'll come and make a complaint about it. You'll have a chance to answer it, But yeah, that's the process.
Right. I've always found, and I want to talk to you about how it felt personally when you became a made man, but I really like, and this again, what I've picked up from the movies and books that have been written about the mafia. You're a made man. So if I'm a made man, you're a made man, there's certain respect that you've got to give each other. And if you can't come up and belt a made man, or you're going to pay the price. Is that you get some benefits from being a made man?
You can never raise your hands to another made man under any circumstances, never. Not even the boss is supposed to raise his hand to a soldier.
That's interesting.
And if he did, the soldiers would not look kindly on that. They wouldn't like that. And that would go against them at some point in time. You're not allowed to raise your hands to one another. You're not allowed to be disrespectful to one another. You're not even allowed to call somebody a liar if they're lying. You have to resolve it in the right way. And that respect, in my view, it was a good thing because it kept things among us civil.
Yeah.
Whenever we were in a dispute or discussing something, there was no beating around the bush. You had to get to the point, make your point, and get a resolve. And whenever we resolved something in a sit down, whether it be a dispute or whatever, it was done right then and there. It was resolved, and whatever the resolution was, that was it. You don't change it. You don't go back. There's no appeals. Nothing. That was it.
Yeah, no right of appeal. I see the logic behind it too, but because the type of person that would be attracted to that life, they're going to be alpha males, and alpha males put them in a room together. There's always conflict and that. So that structure would have kept peace among the families, I would imagine, to a degree.
It did. I mean, things were resolved peacefully. You know, a lot of people think that the families went to war with one another.
Yeah.
Well, you know, that stopped, you know, in the 30s and 40s when Luciano created the commission and the families, you know, had their real structure. You don't go killing one another. If there's a problem, you resolve it peacefully. The only time there is a war in that life is it's a civil war. It's a war within the family and normally for leadership. You know, that's how it happens.
Well, Michael, our outlaw motorcycle gangs could have learnt something by that structure because they bring it down on themselves because they're always in conflict, and every time there's a public shooting or execution, they bring more heat on themselves. So there is sense from an organised crime point of view to keep it contained and not have the conflict, because we get there was one situation here where the Hells Angels and the Comancheros came to blows at Sydney International Airport or Sydney Domestic Airport. And all of a sudden, all the focus, I was in the police at the time, I was in gang squad, all of a sudden, all resources were thrown at outlaw motorcycle gangs because they stuck their head up that way.
Yeah.
With the mafia, the purpose of the business, what's the driving force? If you had to have the business plan, is it to make money? What was the idea of the mafia? What was it about?
Listen, you know, money is power. No organization operates and functions properly without money. Yeah. So, yes, it was a driving force. And, you know, different ways. I mean, mob guys, some of them are very resourceful. But I want to make this clear. You know, in our family, the Colombo family, we had 115 made guys that actually took the oath. Out of the 115, maybe 20 of us were really earners, where we were making good money, supporting ourselves and the family. The other guys were, you know, more gangsters there. Who's got a no-show job? Who's got a job with a union? Who's got a little gambling gig on the side? They didn't really know how to use the life to benefit them in business. But the bottom line is you want to make money. I mean, that's how you function. You know, money, political connections, which gave you power and control. It's all about money and control. That's it. And that's how that organization thrives.
And it comes together, I suppose. You put the two of them. You can't have one without the other. The perception that the mafia within the communities, within, say, New York or Brooklyn, and the way it's often portrayed is that the local community support the mafia to a degree because the mafia don't start trouble on the streets, but they're there to resolve problems and sort of keep the peace and probably do a bit of work that the police can't do. Did you find that when you were in the mafia, that the community, you had support from the community?
Absolutely. We took care of our neighborhoods. I mean, there was no crime in our neighborhoods. The people in the community, they loved us. You know, back in the old days, before Prohibition, and, you know, the mob used to feed on their own, you know, extortion, who they were shaking down people in shops. We didn't do that anymore. We took care of the people in the neighborhood, you know, and we kept the crime out. As a matter of fact, if the mob could have a better presence here now, some of the stuff that's going on in this country wouldn't be happening. Yeah. There's no doubt.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And people say that. I mean, I hear that all the time, you know, on my podcast and on YouTube. I get messages, Michael, we wish you guys were back. Remember, you know, our neighborhoods used to be safe. There was no crime here. We took care of people.
No, I do understand that it doesn't seem to be as formal over here in Australia, but there's an area in Sydney, not far from where we're recording here, King's Cross. Then in its heyday, it was was referred to as the Golden Mile. Anything that was going down would go down at King's Cross. But the people that were involved before, the police were sort of on the peripheral, or sometimes involved in what was going on in the cross, but it was very much ruled by the people that were running the cross at the time. And so I suppose what you've described is just on a larger scale than what we've seen here in Australia.
Yeah, because we had a big presence here in New York. We had in all 5 families during my day, we had about 750 made guys that actually took the oath, that comprised all 5 families.
Yeah.
And then we had, hundreds of associates. So we had a big presence here, and we took care of people, and believe me, there's a lot of stories, a lot of negative things that we did, no doubt about that. And I don't glorify the life. But as far as our own communities and our own neighborhoods, we took care of people.
Okay. That gives us an understanding of the mafia, the structure, and what went down. Let's talk about your life. I could say you were born into it because your father was an underboss in the Colombo crime family. So that would have been a different type of upbringing from most. You want to tell us about your upbringing and your relationship with your father and what it was like being the son of a mafia underboss?
Well, my dad Sonny Franzese was the underboss of the Colombo family. My dad, during his time back in the 60s and early 70s, he was probably the most publicized figure of that era. He was kind of like the John Gotti of his day.
Okay, so high profile.
Always under investigation, always a major target of law enforcement. And so I grew up in that environment, and it was destructive to my family because my dad was in and out of prison, always on trial. Eventually, drew a 50-year prison sentence and went off to prison, in 1970, and left the family in a rough shape. I had younger brothers and sisters. I was 18 years old when he went into prison, and basically I had to take over. I was the oldest of my 3 brothers and sisters, and I had to take over.
Yeah.
But it's look, I always say this. The mob life, the mafia life is an evil lifestyle. And I want to be clear when I say this. I'm not calling the men evil. I was one of them. I just happen to be very fortunate to be out of this. But I don't know any family of any member of that life that hasn't been totally devastated,
right?
Including my own. Now, not my wife and kids. I spared them for that. But, mother, father, brothers and sisters. And across the board, that's the story for most all of the families of members of that life. It's so destructive. So it was tough growing up. We had a dysfunctional family. I love my dad. My dad was a good father. He was a good husband to my mom. But, he was always on trial, in and in jail, out of jail, fighting a case,
Did you have a sense of that growing up? Did you have a sense that, the cops were after him or whoever was chasing him?
You couldn't miss it. I mean, my dad had, during the late 60s, during the late 50s into the 60s, my dad had 7 or 8 different agencies following him around 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They would be parked out of our house. They had us cornered on all sides.
Yeah.
I had many run-ins with them as a teenager. I didn't like that. I grew up hating the police because I saw them harassing my family, harassing my dad, and I loved my dad. So they were the enemy to me. That's the environment I grew up in. I hated cops. I hated the government. I hated law enforcement. So, that was from an early age.
Because it would have, back in that day, it would have been very much physical surveillance, in your face type physical surveillance, I would imagine. If they were targeting your old man, they wouldn't be hiding the fact. Is that how it went down back then?
Oh, yeah. And I had run-ins with them. They pulled their gun and said, we're going to kill your dad one day. And we had run-ins in restaurants with them. And, it didn't leave a good impression. Let's put it that way. So I grew up in that environment.
Yeah. No, fair enough. Could you reconcile what your dad was doing when he was going to it? I'm talking the young Michael now, not the Michael looking back and understanding the complexities of life. But as a young fella, did you understand what he was doing? Did you see the violence? Did he, or did he walk through that door and then just turn into the family man and good husband?
Yeah, my dad never tried to bring what was going on in the outside world with him into the house.
Yeah.
In the house, we were family, and that was it. And quite honestly, I didn't believe anything that was written in the newspaper. I loved my dad. He was my idol. And he was very supportive of me. So I saw everything as being untrue. It's a lie. I don't care.
Yeah.
And I was just supportive of him. That was my attitude back then.
I had to have a laugh. I was reading something in your book, I think it was, about when you were playing sport as a young fella and your old man would turn up, the underboss, and some, let's say, shady-looking characters. And I felt sorry for the opposition or the umpire or referee at the time. It must have
been. Everybody knew who he was, So, when they saw him show up, I always say the umpire never wanted to call strike three on me when he seen that,
That's funny. Now, your life could have been dramatically different, even growing up with your father that way, because you were, at one point in time, enrolled to study a medical degree, looking at becoming a doctor.
Yeah, I was going to be a doctor. My dad wanted me to be the first professional in the family. So I was a pre-med student at Hofstra University when my dad drew that 50-year prison sentence. And then everything changed for me. Joe Colombo, who was the boss of the family, he kind of took me under his wing. And, I started learning the mob life, firsthand when that happened, and just lost interest in school. And the thing with my dad, he was convicted of masterminding a nationwide string of bank robberies.
Yeah.
And, when I went to see him when he got convicted, I said, Dad, bank robberies. And he looked me in the eye and he said, son, I'm innocent. I've been framed. I'm not a bank robber. I didn't commit this crime. That's all I had to hear.
Yeah.
From that point, I said, well, how are we going to get you out of this? And, I was committed to try to get him 50-year prison sentence is a death sentence. My dad went in when he was 50 years old.
A long haul.
Yeah.
And so with that, you've decided you wanted to live the life. Did your dad try to dissuade you from that? Say, Michael, don't go down this path. What was the conversations there?
Well, we had a conversation in Leavenworth Penitentiary in a visiting room. And I said, Dad, I'm not going to school. If I don't help you out, you're going to die in here. It wasn't that I said, hey, I want to join the life. When he knew I was committed, he said, okay, but if you're going to be on the street, I need you on the street the right way. And in his mind, the right way was to become a member of his life. So he proposed me for membership. It was his decision. I said, Dad, whatever you want me to do.
Yeah.
I said, if you feel that that's going to help me, help you, well, then point me in that direction. That's how it happened. I was like 19 years old.
Okay. So you become a soldier. You've taken the oath. Once you've taken the oath, you could be asked to, I would imagine, once you've committed to the family, you're going to be potentially thrown in the deep end. If something needs to be done, you're the one that's got to do it, and you can't really refuse. Talk us about your early times as a made man.
Well, no, Well, what happened was once my dad proposed me, I went and seen the boss, and the boss says, you want to become a member of our life? And I said, yes. He said, your dad has proposed you. Because, you can't just walk up to somebody and say, hey, I'd like to join. Somebody has to propose you. They have to vouch for you. They have to say you have what it takes. In my case, was my dad. And they said, from now on, you're on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Whatever you're told to do, you do. And when and if we feel you prove yourself worthy, we'll let you know. And that's it. So for the next 2.5 years or so, I was a recruit where I had to do anything and everything I was told to do to prove myself worthy to become a member. And look, I'm going to be honest with you, it could have been something very menial. I mean, they're teaching you the ropes.
Yeah.
A lot of discipline, a lot of authority, a lot of respect. You had a meeting at 8:00. If you weren't there by 7:30, you were late. You can never be late in that life. Never, never. Drive the boss to a meeting, sit in the car 2, 3, 4 hours waiting for him. If you leave, you go to the restroom, you get a newspaper, he comes back, you're not there, you're in trouble. I know, I did that once. I paid the price. A lot of stuff like that. And look, everybody knows it. The life at times is very violent.
Yeah.
And if you're part of the life, you're part of the violence. There's no escape.
Yeah.
And if anybody tells you differently, they either weren't a made member of that life or they're just not telling you the truth.
And how did you feel with the violence at that time in your life? Did you embrace it? And we don't have to go into specifics of what you did, but there's going to be times when you're going to have to get physical and get physical in a very nasty way.
Well, listen, I'm going to be honest with you too. There was a lot of guys in that life, and they're known guys
Yeah.
that had a pretty rough reputation. I could say it, the Roy DeMeos of the world, and Greg Scarpas, and that. Allegedly, my father, they say allegedly had 30 or 40 killings under his belt.
Yeah.
That's what they say. I never had that discussion with my dad, but I will tell you this. I did what I had to do because I was always a good soldier in that regard, but it wasn't something I enjoyed. There were times when, there was a situation where I'd have to step outside of myself, to get it done and then do it. But I was never going to be accused of not following an order if I was told to do something. So, but that's how I dealt with it, and there were a lot of guys in that position. Not everybody, there's an impression out there that every guy in the mob, just wants to beat people up and kill people and break their legs.
Yeah.
That's not true. It's not true. Some guys give that impression, and there were those guys that, hey, they enjoyed it. It seemed at least that they enjoyed it, but not everybody.
Now, I've heard you, and I couldn't help myself because I'm an ex-homicide cop, and the obvious question, have you killed anyone? And I'm not going to caution you beforehand or read you your rights or whatever. I've heard you answer the question. Do you want to? I'll ask the question direct and answer it. I'd say, okay, you're in the life for 25 years. You're a made man, a capo. Have you ever killed anyone?
Well, I always get that. You're about. I probably had that question 1,000 times in my life.
Okay, just so I forewarn you, this is a homicide detective. I still want one more catch.
All I will tell you is this, it's a violent life. And if you're part of the life, you're part of the violence. Yeah. And, that's the best way I could describe it.
Okay. You've described the violence that some people like it. Some people, shy away from it. I've seen with organised crime, people that I've dealt with that, organised crime in the level we're talking in Australia that have killed people, and it comes at a price. Some people can kill people and it doesn't worry them. They wear it as a badge of honour. I've seen other people that you think, tough guys, they could do it, but they carry that guilt for years. I've seen them break down and talk about it and that. Is that what you were talking about in the mafia? Some blokes like it, some blokes don't. Is that the...
Yeah, I mean, listen, most when somebody likes it, there's something wrong with them.
Yeah.
I don't care who they are.
Yeah.
You got to have something wrong with you if you enjoy that type of violence.
Yeah.
And I've seen guys in that life, and their reputation matches who they are. I can see it. There's something wrong.
Yeah, they're taking enjoyment from it.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it never ends well for them. Yeah. Every guy that I know in that life that enjoyed or appeared to enjoy the violence all met with a bad ending themselves.
Yeah.
Every one of them, so, but that's another category of human being. Listen, I've learned something. Look, as a Capo regime, I've been in meetings that very, very serious where a guy's life could have been, on the line. And I've always learned to be the last person to pass judgment on somebody, especially in that life, because it's going to happen to you one day. And people are going to remember, this was always the first guy to condemn somebody. And when your term comes, they're going to condemn you first.
Yeah.
When you're the last person to condemn someone, hey, give it a shot. Let's look at it. Let's wait a minute. Well, people remember that too. And in that life especially. So everybody I know, and I'm not kidding, that was always the first to condemn, the first to pull the trigger, they all met with a bad fate. Every single one of them.
For someone to pull a trigger, did it have to be sanctioned from the top?
Yeah, again, murder was taken very seriously in that life.
Yeah.
We weren't cowboys, weren't randomly going out and killing people. It had to be sanctioned by the boss.
Yeah.
Only he, at least in our family, he was the only one that could say, pull the trigger on somebody. And if it wasn't him and you did it, you better have a darn good reason, because you're not allowed to do that, at least in our family. Now, I can't speak for everyone else. That's supposed to be the way it's done. But look, every family, even though you stay within the rules, they operate a little differently. Remember, we're on the street,
Yeah.
This is not, it's not the police force, so to speak.
Yeah.
We're on the street. So, but yeah, in our family, unless it was sanctioned by the boss, you don't pull the trigger.
Again, because I've seen too many murders in my time that, you think it's organised crime. This has been a big falling out. Sometimes it's an argument over a girlfriend, or someone insulted someone at a nightclub, and all of a sudden someone's been shot dead on the street. It's and that would not be condoned in the family that you're in, the Colombo family. Type of I call them ego killings. They're just, I'll get revenge. I'll show you I'm a tough guy. I'm going to kill you. And invariably it's over nothing.
No. Listen, when you're part of that life, you're a made guy. You're supposed to be responsible, in control of yourself. Another thing, when guys did something and they were drunk, they drank excessively, that was never an excuse. You couldn't use, I was drunk, I drank too much. If you say that, you're in more trouble, because you're not supposed to carry yourself that way. You're supposed to. A made guy is supposed to carry himself with dignity and integrity. Believe it or not, I know it sounds crazy, but yes, within the family, you're expected to represent us the right way. And guys that didn't do that, they were put on the carpet. They were in trouble for it.
When you say it sounds funny, I think that's part of the fascination. The fascination of what goes on there. There is that structure, but then there's the dark side of it as well. Tell me, being a member of the family like that, did it stroke your ego? And I'm talking the young Michael at the time. I would imagine, late 20s, or the age that you were, 30s, walk into a nightclub, everyone knows who you are, there's a table waiting for you. Did that come into play?
Well, sure. I mean, look, I had a very idealistic view of the life when I got into it. I'm part of something my father was part of. We have an additional bond between us now. I looked at it like this brotherhood of men. Remember, they told me, wherever you go in the world, you'll have somebody there, a brother there to watch your back. Don't ever worry about your wife, your daughter, your sister, your mother. We'll take care of them. It's this camaraderie among the men that's very powerful. It's powerful. So, it gets to you. And yes, walking into a club, people know who you are. You got a ringside table. You had respect, and, my father always taught me something. My father taught me a lot of good things. But one thing he told me that became so apparent in my life, he said to me, son, remember this, always take care of the little people. Now, when he said little people, he didn't mean it to be offensive. That's just his way of talking. He said, take care of the waiter, take care of the manager, take care of the valet parker, the person in the bathroom that gives you a towel, take care of them. They're the people that make you strong. When I would walk into a restaurant, because it always stuck in my head, he said, the people on top, most of the time, they're looking to cut you down. You're a threat to them, He said, be respectful to them, but take care of the little people. You're going to gain a big army. And listen, I'll tell you a story. I walked into a club one night. It was a new club. And somebody went ahead and said that I was coming. And so they had a table reserved for me, right? Well, they didn't know who I was. They hadn't seen me before. I walk in and I said, hey, it's Michael Franzese. And he said, oh, you're here already. I said, well, really? And so they showed me, believe it or not, it was 2 FBI agents that used my name to sit in the front row, a ringside table. And they see me there, and they said, I said, hey, don't worry about it. Enjoy it. Sit there. I'll sit in the back. It's not a big deal. But you had that kind of a cachet, I would call it. So, it was meaningful. But I took care of everybody. I did.
Are you... and it does make sense, and that's good advice. And I suppose with your old man, he lived to 103, so you do learn a lot about life over that period of time. You also, and I'm just interested from the cop point of view, and it resonated with me because I understand it, that someone was whinging about the way the cops treated them, or an arrest. One of the times you got arrested, and you made the point that whenever you've been arrested, you've complied and haven't caused an issue, and just let it play out. Whereas someone you might be seeing in the cell with going, the cops flogged me, they did this, and you go, well, look how you treated them. Sensible little thing, but I've seen it, and some of the, I'll say, good crooks that okay, well, we'll respect you. You're doing your job. I'm not saying they like us doing our job, but they're not going to carry on. And then the young punks think they've got to be tough guys when you go to speak to them, and they carry on, and that just gets more attention on them. Is that the type of thing that you tried to carry through your career on the, let's say, the dark side?
Absolutely. Look, I've been arrested 18 times. And, it's what I tell these young guys. When you're arrested, you know what I do? I put my hands out, put the cuffs on, and I go through the process.
Yeah.
You can't run away. You can't fight. You want to curse them out. Listen, I'm not saying I've not had run-ins when I was younger.
Yeah.
But when I got my head about me and I became a made guy, I didn't. It was funny. I told an FBI agent once that was all over me, and I said to him, "Listen, you got a job to do. I got a job to do.
Yeah.
I understand what side you're on. If you do your job better than me, hey, that's my bad.
Yeah.
Just don't frame me."
Yeah. Yeah.
I said, "My father was framed. Don't frame me. Get me for what I did or what I'm going to do." And he looked at me. I'll never forget. He said, "I'll never frame you." He said, "That's embarrassing to me. When I get you, I'm going to get you right." I said, "We have no problem." And, when I walked away from the life afterwards, we became friends.
Yeah.
I have probably 3 or 4 agents that I'm friendly with that were on my case trying to put me away forever.
Yeah.
Rudy Giuliani. You know Rudy, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone knows Rudy. Yeah.
Rudy,
Mayor
I
of
was
New
on
York.
trial with Rudy. Had I got convicted, he was going to give me 100 years. And now we're friends.
Yeah.
30 years later. But, there's no sense in being silly with somebody. It doesn't help you.
Have you, I was going to ask you this earlier before we got talking on the mafia side of it. Have you found, because this is what I've found since I've left the cops, I'm speaking to a lot of people that, my career was if we came face to face when we were both working, it might have been guns drawn and, someone wins, someone loses. But sitting down talking to them these days, understanding, getting to know people from the other side, and I've found it enlightening from my point of view. And what I've also found is that we share so much more in common than what I realised when I was just this narrow-minded, and I'm not saying that in a negative sense, that's just the way I went about policing. Hard focus, this was my job. Now I'm out of the cops and I'm speaking to people not dissimilar to yourself, but people who have left the game only recently. And I found it quite interesting. You've said there you've got a couple of people, associates now that were used to be law enforcement officers. Have you found that experience as well?
Oh, absolutely. We have more in common than you would realize, and good people. I mean, I really respect them. I mean, Joe Pistone, Donnie Brasco.
Yeah. Yep.
I actually had not an argument, but a little disagreement with another made guy.
Yeah.
Who was out of the life. He did his thing, and he said, "Well, how are you friendly with Joe Pistone?" I said, and this fella happened to become a cooperating witness and so on and so forth. And I said, "Well, why not?" I said, "He happens to be a good guy."
Yeah.
I said, "Don't get mad at him because he did his job better than we did ours."
Yeah.
I said, "That's the bottom line. We're good friends now. I only met him once on the street, thank God, because if I'd have done business, I'd probably be in jail.
Mightn't have been friends with him if you hung out with him a bit more back then.
I'd probably be in jail right now. But so listen, you got a job to do. Look, the one, when officers or law enforcement cross the line and harass the family, I've been on the other end of that too.
Yeah.
I don't like that. There's no reason for that. But most guys don't do that.
Yeah.
That, at least in my experience, I found that out. They don't do that. They're doing their job.
Yeah, I think if you take that attitude and talking Joe, we had him on the podcast, and in great fella and such an interesting story. But in the eyes of law enforcement, I think I introduced him as there's not many people that have got a worldwide reputation because of what he's done in law enforcement. But that took a lot of courage doing what he did, going in that environment.
Let me tell you something. He was undercover for 6 years.
Yeah.
At any given moment, had somebody detected, he could have walked in the room, never walked out again.
Yeah.
He knew this. He knew it, that on a daily basis, he faced that, because if somebody found out about him, they weren't going to tell him. He was going to disappear. That was it. And he knew he faced that. So it was, in my view, very courageous what Joe Pistone did, really.
And as you said, give him respect. He did his job better than the people that he was targeting at the time. And and let's just glad that you didn't hang out with him anymore.
Absolutely. I hang out with him now.
I reckon you two would have some interesting stories to discuss over a meal. Yeah. That ends part 1 of my talk with Michael Franzese. When we get back for part 2, we're going to talk about how Michael walked away from the mafia and how he had a contract taken out on his life. Make sure you come back and join us for part 2.